Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all again for joining us today here. Just to get out of the way, I know I always ask this, but if you could please silence your cell phones so we can avoid any interruptions. My name is Mohammed. I'm the executive director here at the Jerusalem Fund and Palestine Center. On behalf of our board of directors and our staff, it's a pleasure, as always, to have you here. And thank you also for everybody that is watching online. It's also a great honor to introduce our distinguished speaker today, Mohammed Eid, who's right here. And he will be speaking today about UNRWA's role and impact in the Gaza Strip, specifically coming from his perspective as a refugee. Mohammed is a 28-year-old Palestine refugee who's currently a Rotary Peace Scholar, pursuing a master's degree in global studies and international development through a joint program at the University of North Carolina and Duke University. During this talk, Mohammed will share his story about growing up in Gaza and the role the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, which is also known as UNRWA, the role that they played in his life. And just to give a little bit of a background about Mohammed, he is from the Gaza Strip, which is one of the worst conflict zones in the world, yet is also a very beautiful and lovely place. After studying applied linguistics at the University of Southampton in England, Mohammed began working for UNRWA in 2011 as a youth education specialist. He has worked on many programs and initiatives related to education development and youth empowerment. During the conflict of 2012, Mohammed also worked in the centers that hosted and provided aid to refugees. In the following 4 years, his country was subject to 2 fierce wars, in which there were unprecedented levels of crisis and a rapid deterioration of the humanitarian situation. When Mohammed applied for the Rotary Peace Fellowship, he saw it as a chance to earn significant skills and knowledge, specifically within the Department of Global Studies. He hopes this knowledge will help him coordinate with the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, and other NGOs in an attempt to reform the humanitarian relief program and present a new system that is capable of functioning during a large-scale crisis. He hopes this will contribute to ending the violence and reaching a lasting solution that will save thousands of lives. Mohammed will speak for 30 to 40 minutes, after which we'll have our Q&A session. Again, as always, please wait, especially since we have C-SPAN media here. Please wait for the mic to come to you before you ask your questions so that everybody can hear, especially the people online as well. And for the online audience, you can tweet your questions to us, to Mohammed at Palestine Center. Without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Mohammed Eid.
Thank you, Mohammed. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by thanking you for dedicating your time, and I will thank everyone who's watching us online. I would like to start, for those of you who are not very aware of the geographical context of Palestine. So this map shows the what you would like to call it Israel-Palestine, if you may, and the territory that is marked with this light color is Israel, and the territory that is marked with the darker color is Palestine. You can see that Palestine is 2 parts and it's geographically separated. One part that's called West Bank and Eastern Jerusalem, and one part that is called Gaza Strip. So if we zoom into Gaza Strip, this is Gaza Strip, and it's 8 refugee camps as categorized by the UN. On the eastern and northern borders, it's a buffer zone, and this is Israeli borders. It's 1 kilometer, or during the rise of conflict, it goes to be up to 3 kilometers buffer zone. After the conflict or after the assault, it's 1 kilometer buffer zone, no man's zone. I come from Rafah refugee camp. It's in the far south, lies by the Egyptian border and the Israeli borders as well. This is one of the only photos I have in the refugee camp. We didn't have the privilege of having cameras or smart cell phones back then. This is my home, what I would like to call home. This is the place where I grew up and spent all of my life as a refugee. You can see it's randomly built. It's covered with corrugated metal, freezing cold in winter, scorching hot in summer. The streets are very narrow, but we liked it. We lived there. We just enjoyed being in that refugee camp. We built a special social relationship with our neighbors. Those are the streets of the refugee camp. They're very narrow. It's the place where we study, play, sometimes eat, and in summer sleep, because the houses will be really hot, especially with the power cut. One of the happy memories I had when I was a child was going with my father for taking or receiving the food package from the UNRWA center. The food package will be delivered once a month or sometimes once each other month, depends on how much the UNRWA receives fund from the donors. The food package would include oil, lentils, chickpeas, some basics, but the most basics food supply. But the most important and significant thing for us was the flour. The Palestinian people who grow up eating bread. We eat bread all the time. Flour allows families to bake. We wake up and baking normally, Palestinian families, they start baking first thing in the morning. So as a child, I would wake up on the smell of bread, and my mom would be baking in the house. And there is even local poetry about the smell of the bread in the Palestinian house. Mahmoud Darwish wrote one of those poets. We dip bread in tea. That's our favorite meal. We have it on breakfast, on lunch, and on dinner. We don't have the 3 meals in one day. In my life, where I lived in the refugee camp, I had the privilege of walking every day to the school, I would walk every day to the school, but on Saturday, we would have a local market. It's called Saturday Market. And in different regions, there is different markets depending on the day, on different days throughout the week. So on Saturday, which was a school day, it was a weekday. In the Middle East, the weekend is a Friday, and most of the organizations will operate on Saturday. So I would walk to school, and I would do that through the market, through the local market, and I would meet the locals, old ladies, old men, young people. They're just sitting there randomly. There is no laws, no regulations. Everyone is just have to be considerate for the person next to him. It is very nice. I know some of them. Some of them knows my family. I chat with them as I pass by. Those old ladies, I know most of them. I would just be saying, hi, how is your son doing? She might be asking me about my family or my siblings. Sometimes I pass by, I hear someone trying to bargain the prices with them, and they get the harshest comeback from those ladies. I learned that was a bad idea at a very young age. So in Palestine, if you grab up a camera, immediately children around you will start smiling. They just detect it, and they like to be recorded. We used to call every man an uncle and every woman aunt. And every grown-up would call every child son or daughter. So I would feel like everyone is my family, every place is my home. Literally, I could ask anyone for water if I go thirsty as I'm walking. You could walk into any house. And I remember I would be walking into school on Saturday during the market day, and I would be distracted by everything around me. And many people would be coming down to me and saying, son, you're getting late to school. And I was like, okay, yeah, better rush. This is one of the photos for the busy downtown areas. And maybe the photo doesn't show that, but the cars are moving, the people are moving at the same time, and there is a policeman who's doing his job. It looks random, it looks complicated, it looks unorganized, but it's not. There is a very organizing system over there, and everyone knows that. So the idea is that when people walk by cars or between cars, if they want to cross, in front of the car, or if the car is reversing and they want to cross, all they have to do is just to tap on the body of the car. And somehow it works. The sound is magnified. The driver will hear it inside very loud. Do it to a friend. I'll see, you'll freak him out. So immediately as the driver hears that sound, he stops. And the passenger or the pedestrian will pass by. Sometimes we're walking by and someone is reversing, and he's reversing into a very tiny space. So we just stop and give him directions. And then we move on. It's just, the main rule here is that be considerate for people around you and for everyone around you, and then things can move on. I loved going outside to buy the falafel from the falafel shacks. It's kind of the simplest family business people do in Gaza Strip. If you ever see a falafel shack in Palestine, you will see that there is no line for the falafel shacks. Simply because the culture there says that it's inappropriate to give your back to someone. And people have very strong social relationships that they chat with each other all the time. So if they stand by the falafel shack, they will actually stand next to each other. And that's how you get to chat to the people on both sides. But you don't give your back to anyone. So if women and children show up, they will be given priority. But otherwise that, they will be like a small crowd, and they're all buying falafel and just giving the opportunity for anyone to move on. There is no fight for the line. This is the basic rule for the falafel queue. When it rains in Gaza Strip, that would be a party for young children. We would go out in the rain, dance, have fun. If it keeps raining, then the party stops because the water rises, gets into the houses. And then we have to leave. We take our stuff, whatever is still dry, and we leave the houses. We go to the UNRWA schools. Because in Gaza Strip, we don't have hotels, we don't have emergency centers, and we figured out a long time ago that schools are basically classrooms. It's very similar to the structure of hotels, and we can use them during emergency. So we go to schools, and the UNRWA would provide people with aid and emergency response in such crisis. Sometimes we sail to schools. It would be like a trip. This is one of the families that has been hosted recently in the UNRWA schools during a storm. Not the perfect place, not the perfect conditions, but much better than if they would stay in their flooded houses. Speaking about schools, this is a picture, a photo of an old school. This is exactly what my school looked like when I was young. We had one-floor buildings. My school had lots of trees around them because the classrooms are covered by corrugated metal, and it goes really hot in summer. So the trees would be covering the classrooms. The classrooms were amazing. This is not swimming pool, this is the playground, but it has just rained. Classrooms would have, on the lower levels, it would have from 50 to 60 students. At the upper level, it will have some between 40 to 50 students. It's very crowded, very noisy sometimes, but it's just amazing. I would say this is the best education I have received in my life. This is the nicest things that have happened to me. I wouldn't say enough about my teachers. The teachers were teachers, they were parents, they were mental counselors, they were caretakers. They did much more than they were expected to do. They knew my family, they knew the family of everyone. Sometimes you call them teachers, sometimes you call them uncles, sometimes we call them Abu Ahmad, for example. It means the father of your elder son. That's how Arabs call each other. It's a kind of being close to them, being very friendly with each other. We would do our homework in the courtyard, on the stairs, on the floor, anywhere. Every place could be our studying desk. Schools have changed in Palestine now. This is a very recent school for the UNRWA schools in Gaza Strip. And you can see it's multi-floor building. Students are having tournaments, some sort of tournament or festival. It's amazing. The UNRWA also have an in-service training program where they keep training staff all the time and improving their abilities and skills. So you can see here students, they're learning using games and toys. It's very new and smart methods. We didn't have that privilege back then, but I wouldn't complain. I enjoyed my own way of learning, or my teacher's way of teaching. So I remember the first time I lived through a military operation, and that was when I was 13, 14-year-old. I woke up at night on the sound of the tank's engine. And tanks are so huge, they have a huge engine. You could hear it from a mile or more even. So we woke up on that sound, and there was bombing, there was shooting. We figured out it wouldn't be smart to walk outside until we figure out what is happening. So we stayed inside. And when you're staying inside and the shooting and the bombing is happening outside, you basically think that it's all around you, it's all targeted on you. And because you're still alive, you have the idea or the conception that I'm the only survivor in this village so far. Because the sound is so scary, the whole house is shaking, that you figure out everyone has gone. So we stayed inside all the night. In the morning, we heard someone who was shouting at us, and he said, everyone has to leave the house. He was someone from our camp. As the tanks proceeded through the village, they were followed by bulldozers. And then, because the camp is very narrow, the streets, the roads do not even fit for cars. They wouldn't fit for bulldozers, of course. So they created roads as they're driven through. They're driven through houses, creating their own roads. When we heard that person asking for everyone to leave, we walked outside. I stood in front of my house, and I looked at the end of the road, and I could see the bulldozer proceeding through the road and knocking down houses on both sides. And maybe the photo doesn't show that, but the bulldozer is a huge vehicle. I would describe it as a 2-story building. And when I was a child, and I would look up to such huge creature or spaceship, that was very scary. We left houses. Here you see a family. All of them are trying to signal to the soldier or the driver, telling him, wait. This is in our culture in the Middle East. If you signal that way and shake your hand to someone, it means wait. Because some people were still inside. They couldn't leave on time in the house. And he started bringing down the house. So people would leave, and that would be the worst scene. My family have always told us how they left from the north and came to the south, to Gaza Strip, and became refugees. We've always heard stories about it, but then suddenly we were reliving the same crisis that they have been through. We would take everything we can with us, not because it's worthy, but because we want to feel that we have saved something. Especially if we're going to sleep in the streets the following few nights, then we could use few mattresses and blankets. The very next day, immediately as the military operation stops, the first thing we would see would be the UN vehicles. It doesn't matter if it was working hours or not working hours, they're always on duty. They will come immediately as the military operation stops, and they will provide us with the most important things needed. Mainly, they will start with the drinking water, because we have lost all the water supplies. It has all been destroyed. Normally, the first thing that will be destroyed, the drinking supplies and the power supplies. And then the next thing, they would provide us with tents. Sometimes those tents would be put in schools. They would be put in other places away from the border area. But for most of the families, we would prefer to have our tents right next to the buildings or to the houses that were destroyed. And for a reason, when I think about it, that helps people deal with their trauma. My family stayed in that tent for months after our house was destroyed. And that was just to think about it, just to accept our loss, to feel comfortable walking away after that, and then we move away. So in that tent, I went to sleep, we lived, we ate, we chatted with each other, we studied. I would go to school from that tent and go back to home, calling this tent home. Think of it as a long time camping. I grew up and I started working for the UNRWA. Just a minute, please. And talking about the UNRWA, I would like to mention that I won't be speaking on behalf of anyone other than myself, Mohammed, the refugee from the refugee camp. I grew up, I studied in a local college, and I started working for the UNRWA, the education department. The UNRWA has 7 programs. 3 of them are the main and the biggest programs: the education, the relief and social service, the health program. The education serves over 500,000 refugee children. The health program serves over 9 million patients, 9 million patients each year. And the other programs, the protection, the microfinance, the infrastructure and camp improvement, the emergency response, are all small programs trying to help as much as possible. I worked with the education department, and I managed to work with young people. I managed to work with teachers and help them develop the curriculum, help them improve their teaching strategies, evaluate, assess the whole process. That was something I really enjoyed and I liked doing, and I wish that I could do for the rest of my life. Until the budget, some of the fund was transferred to the emergency response program, and then some of the staff were transferred to the emergency response program. That included me in 2012 and in 2014 military assault. So in 2012 we learned lessons from the military assault, and we prepared for the next one. We had a plan, and we thought that next time we'll be more prepared and we will be able to host up to 50,000 refugees. We'll perfectly host them, provide them with the services, or all the services and emergency response, and that should be good. To give you a glimpse of that attack, I'll show you a few seconds just to get an idea of the scale of the crisis.
Wow, wow.
So if you see the time difference, the bombing started at 4 and finished at 5. In 1 hour, the whole village was destroyed and everyone was displaced, the ones who survived. In the first 3 days or 4 days of the conflict, the UNRWA had 50,000 refugees on the shelters that we have prepared. We wished that the conflict would only last for 5 days maybe. Unfortunately, it lasted for 51 days. By the end of that attack, the UNRWA had 300,000 refugees on site, 6 times more than we have expected and more than we have prepared to receive. The crisis was definitely overwhelming. What happens is that once the bombing starts, the refugees immediately, or the civilians immediately leave their houses and head to the UNRWA schools. People will be marching down the streets in huge numbers. That would be scary. It's like nothing would be like that. People would go into the UNRWA schools, whether they're open or not. Sometimes they would open the schools and get inside. It's war. People will be dying in that case. And then what happens, the UNRWA staff gets there, they prepare the place for them, they give the approval to open the place as a refugee shelter or not. Once it's approved, they will get everyone inside. This is one of the classrooms. Chairs has been taken outside, and then you can see that families, it's very crowded. Families are sitting there, children, women. It's amazing when you walk inside, you grab a camera and you want to take a photo, and then you see children start smiling to you. They are the hope in that misery. And you can see that there are no men in those refugee shelters or in those classes. And that's because of that conservative culture. Out of consideration, men will actually stay outside, or they will stay even in the streets. So if you go outside, we see all the men. They're hanging out, giving all the space for women and children. They also sleep outside. We've provided them with rooms only for men to go and sleep inside, but then they gave those rooms to children and women to give them extra space, and they insisted on sleeping outside. The UNRWA provides them with very important aid and services they need. The first thing we start with would be the mattresses. And you can see that they have different colors, different size, different shapes, because we don't have large suppliers in Gaza Strip. We basically buy them on individual basics. We call people, we call the suppliers, and someone would be able to provide us with 5 mattresses, someone would even provide us with 1 mattress, and we just collect them in that way. The good thing about doing that is that we always try to support the local community. So kind of support the economy of the local community, the hosting society. But it's definitely sometimes we fall short in certain situations. Also, water is one of the most important supplies. During the last military assault in 2014, the 1 gallon of drinking water reached the price of $100, and we couldn't even find it. So when the UN staff reported the humanitarian needs, they asked for drinking water. And then the higher administration wasn't so happy with that. They said, we can't just pay all that money for transferring all that supplies, and then eventually it's just water. This has to be provided locally, and we will have to bring other important things from outside. Then the emergency people, the emergency reporting staff, they said, this is the only thing we need right now as emergency appeal. It's only drinking water. And we ended up getting drinking water from Jordan, and convoys of drinking water brought all the water from Jordan to Gaza Strip because we didn't have them locally. The UNRWA would provide having refugees, having people who have just lost their houses, have just lost their family members. They're sitting in there, and Gaza Strip is a very small place. So when there is bombing, we're actually sitting there and we're hearing it happening around us. So having people in there for 51 days, it's a very stressful, very traumatizing experience. So people, the UNRWA would mobilize mental counselors who would come and provide children with games, with exercises, with debriefing sessions, rehabilitation programs, in a way of helping those young people and the senior people as well, and kind of overcoming their traumas. Unfortunately, the UNRWA staff, they get themselves traumatized sometimes, and they fall victims of the situations. So in 2014, more than around 23 UNRWA staff were killed on duty. At some points, the refugee shelters, the schools themselves were bombed, and people were killed inside. This is one of the schools or the refugee shelters where I used to live. It's in Rafah camp, and you can see it says Rafah Prep Boys School. It's a school, but it has been opened as a refugee camp. It has been bombed during the war. It's very far from the border area. It has been categorized as a safe zone. Suddenly, with all that crowded places, the crowded rooms, the crowded playground where men would stay outside, as I showed you in the photo. Suddenly bombs were dropped over their heads. I'll play this short record just to show you an idea about the crisis.
This was a clearly marked United Nations school where 3,000 people had sought shelter. The UN called it criminal.
It's incomprehensible. How can this continue to happen with all of this information? We have told them 33 times exactly where this shelter is, the last time an hour before the strike this morning. How does this continue to happen? I mean, we've called for investigation, we'll call for an investigation again, we'll condemn this outrageous act of violence, but how can it keep happening?
So he says, we told them 33 times where exactly the refugee shelters were. So every morning, the first thing we do in the morning is that we send reports with coordinations saying so-and-so place is being dedicated as a refugee shelter. And we have to repeat that on a daily basis. So by that day, they have been reported 33 times that this place was a refugee shelter. And it was bombed. It was a surprise for everyone. We didn't know what to do. We didn't know what else we can do. Personally speaking, protection is a relative thing. After all, people did not leave that refugee shelter. People stayed there because they knew that protection was a relative thing. Even with that bombing, still those shelters were the most safe place possible. I'm going to talk about the challenges and difficulties we faced in that context or working in that context. And among that was the carpet bombing. The carpet bombing is so, or basically some other people would call it random bombing, which is just bomb an area. There is another term for it. They call it scorched land policy, where they just bomb everything that is moving, everything that is over the ground, a building, a house, a car, anything. In that area, that's in eastern Rafah. That is the Rafah Black Friday. If you search that in Google, you will get all the information. In 2 to 3 hours, 300 or 200 people were killed in Rafah Black Friday. Bodies, injured people were all over the streets, all over the roads. Calls were coming from everywhere, and the response was way below the scale of the crisis. There was an UNRWA refugee shelter in that area during the carpet bombing, and people were evacuated just a few minutes before bombs targeted that school. And you can see here that the bombing is mainly centered around the main road. So mobility is really it becomes a very difficult, very challenging, and the thing people have to do is just walk. They walk from house to house, from a farm to farm, through the side roads, and it becomes very challenging. Also, one of the main challenges was bombing the power station, which is one of the most strategic targets that probably that would be the target of the first day of the military assault. The first thing we have to deal with is the bombing of the power station. So we have to know that we will lose the running water, we will lose the sewage treatment, and everything that works on electricity. Something else was the surprise of the white phosphorus, or which is categorized as illegal weapon according to Geneva Accord. It's bombed and it covers the whole, one bomb can cover the whole neighborhood. It's a white material that burns for days. It burns literally for days, and it produces a very stinging gas, very acidic gas that is hard to breathe, and it stings the skin itself. The skin would feel burning just being in that region. That substance, if it hits the human flesh, then it's, as locals call it, it's a flesh-eating weapon. It just goes through the flesh. It's so scary, so crazy. We tried pouring water on that, and the more we pour water, the bigger it goes. It's like we're feeding it. The other challenge or problem we faced was bombing Rafah hospital, which is the only hospital in Rafah. It was bombed. And the Ministry of Health, the health staff had to evacuate everyone. They had to evacuate the dead bodies. And the conflict happened in July. That was the attack. You could imagine having no electricity and having lots of dead bodies. We haven't recognized to whom they belong, or we haven't recognized their families, and it's in July. That was a very critical situation. One of the solutions the UNRWA came up with was giving one of their main generators to a local farm storage or vegetable storage. It was like a huge storage that is used to freeze vegetables. And then they got all the vegetables outside and they put all the bodies inside that fridge for those days. And the UNRWA helped the local Ministry of Health and the local health department in developing a categorization program or plan to identify the families, to identify the bodies and find the families in a very quick way to arrange funerals because the numbers were huge and we couldn't wait. We thought that would last forever. One of the other challenges would be the problems with the staff. The staff has families. They live in that conflict zones, in those targeted areas. They will get affected. They will feel bad for their families. I myself received a call when I was in one of the refugee shelters saying that my neighborhood is being under military operation. And my father told me to come back home immediately because we need to get everyone outside. We need to get out a few things. I went back home and I couldn't find home. I just looked everywhere and I couldn't recognize the whole area. It just evaporated. This crater is what you see after a house is being bombed. And because the place is too crowded, the houses are too narrow, then this house is being bombed, but this house is completely destroyed, as well as this one. And those ones are partially destroyed, and this one is completely destroyed. So you basically, one bomb could destroy a whole neighborhood. I went back there immediately. I found my house was bombed. I looked for everyone. Once I found out that no one was killed in there, once I found out that all of my family has left on time, I didn't care. I didn't mind. Once you experience the feeling of losing someone you know or someone you love, everything else becomes easy for you to accept. You will never complain about things. 10 minutes after I was there, I saw my family, I saw my father, and then we were having fun and telling jokes about the bombing and about losing the house and about the bad decor and the bad structure, and maybe we could avoid making the same mistakes this time. Those are two different photos, of course, but just I wanted to show you how it would look like from above. Leaving Gaza Strip and coming for this course, for this program that I'm doing right now, during one of the training sessions the UNRWA have held for the staff, I was one of the international trainers. He suggested to me that there is a fellowship, American fellowship, that teaches students in the fields of conflict, peace, and humanitarian aid. And he said, just make an application and maybe it will work out for you. I did an application and I was selected for the Rotary Fellowship to come to University of North Carolina and Duke, study global studies and international development. That was very interesting, very exciting, only if I could leave Gaza Strip, because no one is allowed to leave Gaza Strip. I mean, that's what it means to have a siege. The UNRWA thought that this program will contribute to their operation, so they agreed on applying on my behalf for a travel permit. They did that, and I was informed 7 times that I'm allowed to travel, and I would pack my stuff, say goodbye to my family, go to the buffer zone, spend the whole day, go through the security interrogation, and then by the end of the day, they will ask me to go back. On the 8th time, I was told that this is the last time. Like every time they would say, come to the buffer zone, and we have given you a conditional offer, which is going through the security interrogation, which is something we're used to. I went there, and I saw that they have already bombed, this is on the Palestinian side, they have already bombed the crossing point authority. So we basically landed into a place that is very traumatizing, very scary. There's no man in there. And I found someone who acts like if he's selling tea, but I feel like he's part of the staff. So I asked him, and he said, yes, I'm part of the staff. You just walk in there and you shout out, you whistle, and someone will come out and help you. I was like, okay. So I walked in, I shouted for people, and someone came out and he said, you're leaving, or what are you asking for? I said, yes, I'm leaving. And he said, follow me. He took me, and basically they will be hiding next to a wall, under a tree, finding a close home and staying inside. They will just keep changing their position because they're very scared that at some point the drones will come up in the sky and they will bomb them. And that happens all the time. So they stamped my passport and they sent me to the next point where there was security people or security team who reached out to the Israeli side and they said, we have this and that person. This is his name, this is his ID number. Let us know when should we let him in. After a while, they reached out to them on the radio and they said, let Mohammed Eid come in. The security team, they were very nice. They told me they have this door or this gate built on the Palestinian side. They say to you, if your bag fits in that rolling door, then take it with you. If it doesn't, then leave it behind because the Israeli army will not allow you to take it in. My bag did fit that door, luckily. I went inside and then I have to walk through the buffer zone for 1 kilometer. That's 1,000 meters, maybe 3,000 feet. Walking in there, just dragging my bag, and it's no man's zone. Everything around me is destroyed. No trees, no houses, no buildings, no one, nothing. This is the buffer zone that connects Gaza Strip to the wall. The wall is a huge 30-feet wall with military towers across the wall. And once I get close to the wall, that's where I would find the gates. The most scary thing about the wall wasn't the military towers, but it was the mobility or the movement sensation or sensitive machine guns. So I would be walking in there. They tell me that if you walk inside this tunnel, the machine guns will not sense your movement and they will not kick in and start shooting at you. So I would be walking there, hopefully that it does not do that. Once I reach that end, I'll find the gates, 2 gates. They watch me through the camera. I have to open my bag, empty everything, and they watch it through the camera, then bring everything back inside. Once they get sure that I've shown everything, they open the gate. I walk inside. There is a table inside. So I do the same thing again. I empty my bag on that table, and the table has some kind of a scanner system. It scans everything. I take everything inside again and walk in. I reach the Israeli side. This is the Israeli air is crossing. You want to travel, and by the crossing you see a tank and soldiers with heavy machine guns. Every person who works at that crossing is either a soldier or a special force soldier or something like that. And it's a very scary place to travel through. When I reached there, the other side, they simply, I went through the security interrogation and all the procedures, but then suddenly they said to me, they brought a small bag, like a bag you would take to the gym, or you would have your meal in that bag when you go to work. And they said to me, fill this bag with clothes and leave everything behind. Your cell phone, your laptop, your food, your drink, your electronics, everything, not even my flash drive. And I said to them, I can't do that. I have to have my laptop on me. I'm a student. I'm traveling to study. I have to have my laptop on me. And they said, well, that's fine. You can have everything on you, but make sure you go back to Gaza Strip and tell everyone that we allowed you to travel and you are the one who said no. Yeah. So I kind of figured out that it was their way of dealing with my request to travel. The UNRWA has asked for that. The US consulate was involved in that process. The Rotary Foundation was involved in that process. So probably too many people have gave them a headache, so they decided to kind of play a game with that. I left everything behind and took their bag and left. The way it works, I leave from the north of Gaza Strip, and then I take a taxi. I pay for it. It's a very expensive taxi. No one would like to work in that region, unless if he was desperate. I would take a taxi and then would be accompanied by an army vehicle. I will go all the way through the Israeli territory and then the Palestinian territory, and then I go to Jericho. In Jericho, I have to pass through more than 3 checkpoints. It would be Israeli checkpoints, would be Palestinian checkpoints, and Jordanian checkpoints. Once I'm cleared by the three checkpoints, and for the Israelis, they would have more than 1 checkpoint, and they would be the worst checkpoints. They have very strict regulations. And they're separated from the checkpoint in Gaza Strip. They don't coordinate with each other. So I have to go through the same process all over again. Once I finish, I passed to Jordan. I stayed in Jordan for 10 days, 2 weeks. I finished my visa, the US visa interview. I wanted to do that in the West Bank or in Tel Aviv. I said to them, I just have to quickly do the US visa interview and then travel to Jordan. And they said, no. Not Arabs from Gaza Strip are not allowed to go into Israel. They didn't even use other terms. They said it that clear and that loud. So I went to Jordan. I done that in Jordan. And then after that, I traveled to the US. Since I came here, I haven't seen, but very generous community, very generous and kind and friendly people. People have been very supportive for me. They have been very kindly responding to me and to my people and to my community. I have nothing but to thank everyone, to thank my host community, my friends in North Carolina, my neighbors, the UNRWA USA I'm volunteering with right now. Everyone I have met so far has been so friendly to me. I cannot but appreciate that. And I cannot ignore the fact that the American people have stood by my people during the past 70 years of their suffering. If any one of you has paid his taxes to the federal government during the past 70 years, part of that has gone to the UNRWA and to my people in the refugee camps. Since then, I have been traveling around, attending conferences, meetings, discussion sessions, contributing to the main concern for me, which is humanitarian effectiveness and sustainability. How can we do more? How can we help those refugees? How can we respond properly to their crisis? How can we address large-scale crises? Those are very important and critical questions in my field of study. And I feel it's my duty at this time to contribute back to that field, to those communities. Not only my community, I believe humanitarian crises have no religion and no ethnicity, but to all or any humanitarian crisis that would appear in the world. Hopefully I would manage to do that at some point. I thank you very much for your listening, and I would like to take your questions. Thank you very much.
My name is Cynthia Walker, and I was invited to go to UNRWA years ago, probably before you were born, and had the pleasure of going over and seeing the place. I have been a member of Rotary. I was also a recipient of a Rotary International scholarship. I did not learn about this meeting until very recently, and the head of Rotary International, whom I informed last week of your speech, was unfortunately not here. So the Rotary Clubs of Washington are not aware of your presence here. And I hope that in the future you will somehow utilize the local Rotary clubs that you go to in the areas that you go to speak to them and show them the pictures that you're showing. It was very interesting and very good. That's what we were there for.
Thank you. I absolutely appreciate that, and I'm amazed, and maybe not many people know, but the Rotary organization have very similar projects to the UNRWA. So they're providing humanitarian needs like drinking water. They're providing education. They're providing healthcare in cases of Ebola crisis and Ebola emergency situation in Africa and in different countries. Rotary is doing an amazing work. I'm very proud to be part of them, part of Rotary as a fellow, as a Peace Fellow. And hopefully I'll get to contribute back to this organization. Thank you.
Mohammed, I have a question for you.
Yes, please.
you know, you showed us a video of the bombing in Gaza. But I think here maybe it's one thing when you see it on a video. It's still obviously very powerful to see it on a video. But I think people maybe don't realize how devastating it is to see it yourself. You know, you see finding your house bombed. Can you describe some of that? I mean, how does it feel to be on the ground there and then just seeing all of this destruction, seeing bombs take out an entire neighborhood? Because, you know, again, you see it on a video, it's different than when you see it in person.
Yes. I'd say this is one of the things that I wouldn't want my audience to really know it or understand it. I would just want to tell them this is bad, this is ugly, no one should go through that, and I hope you will never get to know what it's like in your life, because this is one of the moments you stand blank. There is nothing in your mind, nothing in your brain, your life is empty, and you can't do anything. You don't know where to run, where to go. You've suddenly lost everything in your life. The things that come up in your mind are so crazy and so traumatizing. All I need to tell you that this is bad. You shouldn't be on the side where these things are being planned or being caused to someone else. It would be nice if you help a person in that situation who's being a victim in that of that crisis. But that's all you need to know. No one deserves to know more than about those crises than this.
And just out of curiosity, was your house rebuilt afterwards, or is it still destroyed?
So my first house that was in the refugee camp, it was destroyed, and then we moved to my second house, which was destroyed in 2014. Normally the rebuilding process takes more than 10 years because the UNRWA has to get the fund first. They have to coordinate with the Israeli government to allow the reconstruction material to get into Gaza Strip, and then they have to find contractors and start the process. And then so the whole process of delivery takes more than 10 years. It's very complicated. So losing my house during the last assault, we haven't yet received or rebuilt the new house. We're still renting. And the UNRWA has a renting scheme, which is paying families to find houses and stay in. So luckily we're supported by the UNRWA now, and we're staying somewhere else.
Mohammed, Shukranik here. Thank you for being here and for sharing your heart as well as your professional expertise. I was an NGO executive in the Middle East for over 5 years, and I did see jets, American-made jets, fly over apartment buildings and knock them down, and have had people killed on either side of me, standing at the Netzarim intersection at the Red Cross triage center. And I'm wondering if your colleagues have had any luck in gathering the residual parts of the weapons used to indicate that American weapons are being used against civilians, which is against the Leahy law, that American weapons can't be given to a country that then uses them to use against civilians indiscriminately. We saw the same residual shell casings and so on, even in the Bethlehem area. But is that part of the process at all that the UN system uses to try and identify and authenticate the fact that this law is being broken?
Thank you for the question, and afwan. I haven't heard, I'm not aware of that process being implemented by the UN staff. What the UN would do would be reporting on human rights violation and cases of bombing and killing, but we don't collect these things. But I'm sure the local government or other organizations would be doing that thing. We're aware of weapons being used in this war from different countries. On Rafah Black Friday, there is this is well known to the media if you search that. But on Rafah Black Friday, the refugee camp was bombed so bad that they ran out of bombs, actually. And running out of bombs, they opened one of the warehouses that was in Israel, and it turned out to be a strategic storage for the US Army that was placed in Israel. So they opened it and they got out all the weapons and used it in bombing Rafah camp, unfortunately. Yes, please.
I just wanted to inform you guys the reason that those are American weaponry is when the U.S. gives foreign aid to a country, the country is required to spend about 77% of the money they receive on armaments from the U.S. I went to a talk several years ago that the Cato Institute did on this. And I think it's not, they specifically were talking about Israel because it was the only country that gets only gets foreign aid for military, but I'm sure it applies to every other country, like wherever else we're giving it, except Palestine.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. You're utterly cool. You've been through hell, and now you are so concentrated. Your presentation was terribly impressive. The videos and so on. A two-part question. Hamas. Now, Hamas supposedly is a Muslim Brotherhood organization. Do they provide any assistance in terms of education or housing? Second question. Has the present United States administration that's reduced so much aid to the United Nations and possibly UNRWA as well affected these programs that you've benefited from? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with the second question. So with the aid cut, with the U.S. administration aid cut to the UNRWA, the U.S. administration is the largest donor for the UNRWA for around 70 years. It has been so. Suddenly last year, or even in the last few months, that the U.S. administration decided to suspend the fund to the UNRWA. In a very short notice, the UNRWA reached out to the local governments because the UNRWA operates in Gaza Strip, West Bank, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. So it reached out to the local governments to absorb the numbers of those students in case the UNRWA couldn't operate in the next academic year. What happened is that those states, they provided reports with data and statistics saying they had no capacity whatsoever to absorb those numbers. That's why I'm volunteering with the UNRWA USA now. We're racing against the clock to try to sustain the fund, to maintain or to raise the fund enough, or at least to advocate against that U.S. decision to make sure by the end of this month more than 500,000 refugee children will go back to schools. So definitely, and the UNRWA on the other side has cut down the expenses, have shortened the programs, the operations, thus have discharged tens of their staff in Gaza Strip who are already the only breadwinners of their families. So the UNRWA is working on all aspects, on all levels to cut expenses, to maintain or raise funds from other sources, but it's definitely a disastrous situation. The local government of Hamas, I'm aware that they have been providing aid and they have been providing relief to the local community, but it's on a very limited scale. It cannot even be counted as an emergency response. The government of Hamas they won the election in 2005 and 2006. And as democracy works in most places, not many people were happy with Hamas being in the government, but we thought we're going to choose someone else in 4 years. Now with the war started and with the siege and with all the military assault, they have bombed every single state building. They have, in certain cases, they have assassinated state officials. Now it has been, since 2006, it has been almost 12 years, and we can't do elections in Gaza Strip. Hamas has been calling for elections almost every day. They feel burdened of this responsibility because of the siege. There is no exportation, no importation, no local production, no source of income. it's basically failing as a government. They can't do anything. They're calling for elections every day. They're calling for a humanitarian international intervention. Nothing of that can happen as long as there is a blockade and siege over Gaza Strip, unfortunately.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mohammed, so much for your presentation. Thank you for your perspective on living in Gaza, and we hope to see you here again.